continues to kind of come in, I don't want to burn up any time because we have a very special guest here this morning, David Tandy. David has been in the title company business in some form or fashion, as well as in the technology business since 1981. He is well known in the Austin area as being quite real estate matters and title business and all things that it kind of tends to encompass our world. He is a good friend of Gene Fredericks, a friend of a lot of our agents here. About, goodness, David, what, 4 or 5 months ago in May, 3 months ago, I guess, David stepped out and opened up Texas National Title. And I'm sure we can relate to this because he now has 10 offices and 100 people. So he is experiencing exponential growth, growing tremendously. I think faster than what he necessarily intended, but he is a dear friend of ours. I will tell you, when Ron and I were actively marketing and outselling, it's his offices and his title people that was always our go-to. EXP as a company is not necessarily endorsing anyone, but I will tell you that is our preferred one, and they are incredible. They always do a fantastic job. Currently, they are in the Austin metro area, but there is talk and hope and plans eventually to, I think, take over the whole state of Texas. So David has recently did a presentation on the economic forecast, and it was so great, incredible, that we invited him into our cloud environment to come in and present. This is a first for us. We've not had a special guest come in and present before at a state meeting. I think it may be a first for David. I'm not sure he's ever been an avatar before, whenever he's presenting. But just you all, please welcome David. And as he presents this, I think you'll find it valuable. It is an economic forecast and some highlight points that affects the entire state of Texas. So it's relevant to all of us. And as he had mentioned earlier, if you were in here early, feel free to type in any questions throughout his presentation. He only has one screen, but I'll read off those questions to him, and he'll be glad to answer those. And if you all would, we can hit our F4 key is how we do our applause here. So please give him a round of applause. And I'm going to scoot out of the way. David, welcome, and thank you for being here.
Thanks, Sheila. I'm looking forward to this. This definitely is my first time to do a live streaming avatar virtual environment, but I look forward to it. The presentation normally that I do is about Austin and drill down into a lot of detail about exactly what's going on in this market and what are some of the trends and everything from all the demographics, population through job status and job growth rates, what makes Austin unique. And I've kind of taken most of that out and stepped back and looked at Texas overall and pulled up some information that's specific to each one of the 4 markets. A lot of some general information about Texas, and specifically a lot of issues about the Hurricane Harvey and some of the impact it's going to have on Houston and on Texas in general. And just some of it is just my commentary and my opinion about some things that I'm tell you right up. Just don't pretend to be one. Play one on TV on occasion, but that's about it. This is more about just kind of what's going on in the market and try to present some things that you can use with your buyers and sellers, and you plan your business. So that's more my attempt, is to look at that. So I even throw in some things about some trends in the real estate industry. I think you all represent a major trend in it, and I kind of touch on that. Also hit on something I think is really important, which is the wire fraud and cyber fraud that's going on. That is just, we've been attacked here just the last 2 weeks several times with some very sophisticated attacks to participating in your clients and or you directly, and miswiring the funds to the wrong place. So it's worth talking about that just a little bit. So I end with some slides on that. So let's get started with it. The first thing I want to talk about is the hurricane, and give you some general big picture views of it, about Houston and the impact on it. It was one of the mostly hurricanes that we've had so far now. Katrina was by and far the winner up until now. They were $160 billion worth of damage and expense that was incurred. Those are adjusted to 2017 dollars. And Harvey is all kind of still all over the page. I don't think anyone still knows for sure, but estimates from FEMA and from the governor's office is as high as 180 billion. Irma was at one point being projected. I'm just going to throw this one little tidbit in about Irma. She at one point was projected to be as 300 billion, and it took, because it was just going to go up and pretty much wipe out Florida. It took a little at the last minute and wound up missing a whole lot of Florida and not doing near as much damage as it does. So they've adjusted those estimates down to 60 to 90 billion. But you add those two together, and we're definitely at 200, if not 250 billion of those two. So it's going to leave a dent in the federal budget, and it's going to be, I think, a big challenge to fund all of that. So I think that is an issue with trying to get everything funded that we need for Texas. Just a quick overview of what happened with the flooding. This gives you a view of Houston, and I used a map that was showing the percentage equity aggregated. So you can see where there's 50% equity down to 27% equity. And here's what the flooding looked like. So you can see where it occurred in the Houston area. And I know it was more than just the Houston area, it was the whole Gulf Coast area, including Rockport and Port Aransas and many other areas, Victoria. But this kind of gives you an idea of just how much flooding was going on. Here's a list of just some bullet points of the impact. Is 100 to 180,000 homes damaged or destroyed, 30,000 homes to 40,000 destroyed, but total number that are impacted or damaged up to as many as 180,000. The number of individuals that have now applied for assistance is up to 770,000. When you think that the population of in the 6 to 7 million, and you're almost close to 1 million individuals that have applied for assistance. I assume that is for the whole Gulf Coast, the 770,000. So that's probably more like around 10 to 12 million out of a pool of 10 to 12 million. 700,000 applied. And that's still such a large number. It's pretty amazing. Reported in one place. That's just hard to even comprehend that much rain at one time, added up to 20 trillion gallons across Texas and Louisiana. 50,000 rescued. The damage to just the homes is ranged between 20 and 32 billion. Kind of leaves you wondering where the other up to 150 billion. I really haven't been able to pull any solid numbers on where the rest of that is. Is that infrastructure? Is that offices? What else end up being? But those are pretty consistent estimates that it's up to as much as 180 billion. Amazingly enough, homeowners did not have flood insurance for the most part. 80 to 85% of them did not have flood insurance. Some of that's due to people not being in the flood area that then wound up flooding. And some of it is that there's just been a growing trend that people start out flood insurance and then they drop it. In Katrina, there were more people that had flood insurance. It was up to around 30% had flood insurance, or 35%. And in the Houston area, it's not near that number. An amazing number of cars damaged, 500,000 plus. There was one report of 1 million, but I don't think that Wired magazine reported 1 million, but I think the 500,000 number is much more accurate. At least 85% of them did not have comprehensive, so those cars are significant or total losses to them. So it kind of gives you an idea of the scope of the challenges facing them. Here's some issues that they're going to have to address in the Houston area. I lived there for 10 years, and I can appreciate some of these. The two big issues deal with the two reservoirs that 70 years ago they were built, and there was not very much growth around them or behind them where the water backs up into it. Over time, they've just built more and more and more around all that, which means there's less impervious cover, more water flows in, and as it fills up, it begins to flood subdivisions. So all that development that's surrounding those reservoirs actually wound up being in the reservoir of where the water was being held. As they started letting the water out 3 times the normal rate to keep it from overtopping the dams, then you had more flooding downstream in the Buffalo Bayou. They've had some pretty good plans. It was about a $400 million plan to fix that. And it involved some giant conduits that would go under the ground into the Houston Ship Channel, but none of that ever got funded. That's about a 20-year-old study that pretty much documented exactly what wound up happening with this storm. Maybe they will dust those off. I doubt they cost 400 million. Now it's going to be much more than that to do what they need to do to be able to channel that water and just get the drainage off. And the drainage out of those reservoirs and drainage in many other areas is one of the things they're looking at. Another major push is a $15 billion project for a coastal seawall that would be a series of structures that would help protect from storm surge. We didn't have that much storm surge this time, but that's would present a whole nother challenge that could have happened. And then just a few other things, a lot of discussion about building codes in other areas. They've increased the building code significantly in Florida and other areas. It'll be interesting to see if that starts happening more in Houston. Will they cordon off certain areas where they have continually flooded over and over? You're going to have a process of rebuilding 100,000, 150,000 homes that need some level of reconstruction. A lot of temporary housing is needed for people that have been displaced, up to 50,000 people that are not able to even live in their home. Replacing 500,000 vehicles is actually going to wind up being an economic boost to the area and to car dealerships. And just an immediate issue is the cost and challenge of removing all the tons and tons of debris and where do you put it? So those are the issues that Houston is addressing right now. Some good news, they have set aside $15 billion in funding so far. They are having major discussions about that they need up to another 150 plus billion from the federal government. There's been a lot of FEMA grants already granted, a lot of SBA loans already processed. And I think the governor and John Sharp and FEMA have worked unusually well together so far to get things moving very rapidly. I didn't include a lot of that, but I came across a lot of research showing just how fast they're moving to get things, get funds where they need to go and get help where it needs to go. And that leads to the recovery, which a lot of research has been done on disasters like this and where they can move quickly and where they can identify the needs and where they can provide the funding. The economies actually turn around pretty rapidly. Experts project that Houston will be back to 80% of the economy within 6 months, 90% in a year, and 100% within 3 years. Came across 2 or 3 different sources saying that. Other sources was true. Katrina was an example of a much more drawn out, and part of that was that so many people left. The jobs weren't there, and so people left and didn't want to come back. And I don't think that's true in the Houston area. I think the Houston area, the jobs will be there, and that's what really drives. There's quite a few studies that just say if the jobs are there, that's what people need is a job, and so they stay and they work through it, and that's one of the big things that really helps areas recover. Government aid was much slower to arrive. Some of the insurance payouts were much slower, and I think everyone learned from Katrina much less. Texas has just been very focused on trying to avoid those challenges that were Katrina and not repeat that. So a lot of potential for all of this investment and rebuilding to be actually help with the economy. I've seen articles and a number of sources saying, well, a lot of people are to move out of there, and that's just not practical. Um, Even if have been flooded several times in a row, your job's still there, so your family's there. So I don't see that being near the issue that some of the articles have said. Just to kind of wrap up on just Houston before I get into Texas, it's hard to appreciate just what a huge economic driver Houston's Texas is an energy state. Houston is an energy town, and when you really dig into the numbers of what's involved with that, it's pretty amazing. Just the port of Houston and the impact it has, and how much it's growing. They have dredged out the channel. They've added some of the biggest cranes there are in the world. The amount of imports and exports going through the Port of Houston have actually begun to increase dramatically, and no anticipation that that's going to slow down. Uh, it's one of the largest big cities there in the U.S. that has got affordable housing. That is a major draw for employers. That will continue to do so. It continues to have good positive job growth. It's one of the largest markets for single family construction. There were a record number of building permits and homes under construction whenever this hit. And that's going to be disruptive of many of the homes that were damaged, but over the long run, that's just indicative of a very strong market. And the trade numbers that just you see with Mexico are just increasing pretty dramatically over the last year to 2 years. Here's just a picture of what the amount of trade that goes on. The first chart, the first table is actually the airport and how much international trade goes through the airport. $75 billion worth of trade through the quote unquote Port of Houston, which is the airport. The actual shipping port, everything that's in green is either Louisiana and Texas. That accounts for 47% of all of the trade in the United States. Just the Texas ports alone is 23, almost 24% of the tonnage that goes through. I don't even think I realized that, how much the Gulf Coast is responsible for the goods coming in and out of the United States. I'm going to shift over and talk about population growth. I think it's one of the really key factors that impacts everything. When I do my presentations on just Austin, I spend quite a bit of time on this, just talking about what the amount of population growth has been. The overall United States growth has been very consistent, almost 1% growth per year. This chart that you see right here is showing, so 1970s, I'll indicate there, that's 2.4% growth per year during that decade, or 269,000 people per year during the 70s. So if you skip up to the 2010s up here, Texas grew at 1.8% per year and added 425,000 residents. That's both births over deaths, and that's net in migration. Per year, 425,000 new residents. That's a really staggering amount of population growth that Texas is undergoing. We're at 27 million today. We were 11 million in 1970. You fast forward to 2050, we'll be at around 51 million. And that's actually conservative, because if you look at the growth rate per year, I drop that down to 1.8. And most of the projections by the demographers are showing that it would be more than that. So during certain parts of that, so it could be 55 million. But even if it was just under 50 million, that's still staggering to look at the state of Texas and how we'll be dealing with water issues, traffic issues, storm damage issues, as we grow from where we are now up to 50 million population. At some point along the way, we passed California as the most populous state. And you have to ask yourself, number one, will we continue to generate the jobs for that? And there's just every indication in the world that companies relocating, employers opening up regional headquarters or regional offices in any one of the four major markets will continue for all kinds of good reasons. We're a business-friendly state, where it's warm, where it's got a lot of opportunity. There's a lot of capital flowing through each one of the big cities as far as startup opportunities. So I don't, just like in Austin, I don't see anything that's going to stop the kind of growth we've had. I don't see anything that's going to stop the growth in Texas. So the United States has been running around 1%, 2% growth per year. Austin has been consistently running around 3% growth, population growth per year. So you've seen during the same period of time, Austin grew from 400,000 up to 2 million from 1970 through now. And we're going to grow from current 2 million up to 5 million population growth by the year 2050. And that's probably conservative. Again, don't see anything that's going to slow that down. Traffic issues and water issues and everything else. Everyone's moving here has got the same problems where they're coming from. So, eventually there may be some things that create a problem, but certainly not for the foreseeable future. This gives a view of all four cities from 1970 through. You see the kind of mark where it is today and how Austin and San Antonio are around the 2 million mark. The DFW and Houston area are in the 6.5 to 7 million population. You see Austin and San Antonio growing up to 4 million and 4.5 million, 4.2 million and 4.5 million respectively. And the Dallas and the Houston area growing up to 13 million. So just those two cities will have 26 million population. That's the entire state of Texas today will be in metropolitan areas, count DFW, and I include Fort Worth in that. And those are with relatively conservative growth numbers over that period of time. Looking at job growth rates, and I normally for Austin, and I could do this for any of these other markets if anyone would be interested in, I'm happy to do it, drill down into the what comprises the jobs in that area and the job trends over periods of time. This gives you just kind of a single snapshot. Dallas, Fort Worth area has been growing at the best clip as far as job growth. All of these cities have been in the 3 to 3.5%, and really in the last 12 months, all of them have slowed down pretty dramatically. So we were in the top 10 even just 12 months ago, and certainly 18 and 24 months ago. And over the last 12 months, Austin has slid down to we're ranked 22 out of the top 50, which is the first time in probably 7 years we've been there. Over the last 5 to 6 years, we've been consistently in the top, and would be, if you looked at it over that whole period of time, we'd be in the top 1, 2, or 3. So even though 2% or 2.3% is good job growth rate, it's dramatically less than what we were. So some of that. Yes.
One of the questions is Joy was asking why or what is attributing to the DFW employment growth rate being higher.
I think that Austin doesn't really have that many Fortune 50 or Fortune 100 headquarters at all. Those headquarters wind up going to Dallas. They go to Houston. Now maybe even more to Dallas. So I think that so many companies look at Texas and they say, I want to relocate out of wherever I am from, because there's a growing number of issues from, public pension plans are breaking the budget and causing a pretty significant degradation of social services and public services, everything from schools to libraries in many, many of the cities. And so companies are looking at, where can I go where a state knows how to balance its budget where the tax rates make sense, where I can find labor pools and can grow my businesses. And Dallas just hits on all of those points just so well. Good labor pool, strong in financial services, really attractive for headquarters of Fortune 100 and Fortune 50 companies. Austin is not that. Austin is a regional headquarters, attracts a lot of tech talent. That's the labor pool for Austin. Houston's got the whole energy environment. San Antonio continues to lag as far as perception for companies to move there, but I think that's going to change over time. Austin San Antonio corridor combined together is going to be a pretty significant powerhouse. That's going to wind up being a 10 to 12 million population center by itself, by 2050. And a lot of it's going to be about affordability of businesses to be able to move here and be market, but set up their company and have an affordable place for their employees to live. That's probably not Austin. That's going to be more like in the San Marcos area and towards San Antonio. But I see that, and data just really shows that that's a growing trend for what's going to happen. Let's look at the unemployment rates for a second. This gives you through August of this year, the trend lines for unemployment rate. Even with all the oil price issues and energy issues, you've still got Houston at a 5% unemployment rate, which is 4.5% to 5% is still full employment. It's hard as you get below 4.5% down to 4% or even lower, like you see with Austin. That's actually really hard on an area. Employers look at a market that has got a 2.8% like we were a month ago. In Austin, the seasonally unadjusted rate was down to 2.8, I think 2.7, 2.8 unemployment rate, and that's just really hard on. They look at that and they think, well, there's no labor pool there. So again, they start looking around and they look at the Austin San Antonio corridor and even Houston, and they see a much better labor pool. So this is a big thing that companies that are relocating are looking at all the time. They like to see a healthy economy that doesn't have a high unemployment rate, but they don't necessarily want to see a super hot market where they come in here and the only people they have to hire are people that have to go steal from other companies. So, and that's kind of what they're looking at in Austin right now. The other markets really are just extremely good and healthy over a long period of time here. This gives you building permit data for each one. It's kind of going around the clock here, starting with upper left-hand corner with Houston. You see building permits kind of topped off the last 2 years. Really still a very healthy, between 30 and 40,000, around 35,000 building permits, which is a lot of building permits. But one of the things that I do when I break it down for like Austin, it doesn't necessarily matter how many you're building. It matters how many you're building for the amount of population that's coming in. So in Austin, as an example, it's like 4 residents per household. And when you've got 57,000 people coming in per year, you've got to build 20,000, 18,000 single family and other types, multifamily. And you see, for instance, go down to the right-hand corner, Austin, we're not doing that. We're doing 13,000 last year. This year, we're on track to actually get to 15 or maybe 18,000 for the first time ever, but we've got 7 highlighted here. Where's my pointer? Can't get my pointer to work. So we got 7 years where we were not able to build that many. And we have a housing shortfall, which is really showing up in our active listings and showing up in our inventory. We have a very, very low inventory. And for the first time this year, Austin is having almost a 24% drop in active listings. So in any given month in Austin, you might have in the past had I'm sorry, 1,100 for 1 month active listings. Now you might, I'm sorry, 11,000. And this month you might have 8. And now this time you would have 8,000. So you have almost 2,000 active listings less in a given month this year than you would have had any time in the previous 4 or 5 years. And that's all just 100% due to supply and demand. We just have been undersupplied for so long that we just cannot stay up with the demand, and sellers are just not interested in listing right now. So I haven't had a chance to look as much. I hear anecdotally you have some of the same thing going on in where you've had a continual population growth, and you see each one of these markets has had a dip in the construction, even though I showed you that the population continued to grow through all of it, including even in the U.S. You had a tremendous drop in the number of single-family homes being built. We went from building 1.6 million down to building only 400,000 homes a year. Yet our population on a U.S. level continued to grow after the recession. So you see the same thing occurring in each one of these markets. And the end result is we're winding up with a pretty big crunch on having enough housing available for people to live in. And literally in Austin, we have anywhere from 30 to 40,000 unit shortfall for what we really need based on the population growth. Here's a building permit for multifamily. Multifamily is what you would hope would fill in when we're not building a single family. And they have struggled across the board. San Antonio's showing an upward trend, but there's my pointer. So San Antonio is showing an upward trend, but they're starting from such a low level that it's not making much of an impact. Everyone else, Houston has the last 2 years had a downward trend, and for the last 4 years, Austin's had a downward trend of building multifamily. So they've not been able to step in and fill the need that is as much as it is needed there. Dallas is kind of the exception. They have done a good job at continuing to build multifamily more than really any other market. And that's been helpful to fill the need for the housing need up there. Austin has really struggled with the fact that they were not able to maintain the increased building of the multifamily. A lot of that is due to so much of the financing for this is just not there. So they have to resort to equity financing, and there's only so much equity financing to go around to be able to provide all the multifamily projects that are needed. Too many banks want to do their 2 deals, and then they're like, I don't want to get caught with that being the one. I remember what that was like the last time where I built the last one and it didn't get filled up. So there's a lot of reluctance to just keep building as much as what the population growth would indicate is needed. I'm going to go through just 4 slides real quick, just showing you the numbers of sales and average price. You see in Houston area, the numbers of sales really topped off. So there's a kind of flattened off. It didn't continue to grow. You're going to see the other markets. That is not the case. It's continued to grow. But a steady trend of increased average prices and median prices. I don't have that charted on here. And that's all the supply and demand. Same thing for Dallas, Fort Worth. You've seen a very steady increase over the last really 8 years. You've added $75,000 to the average sales price. Over that same amount of time in Austin, you added $100,000 to the average sales price. Austin shows what I was just saying, gone from $250,000 up to $350,000 in the average sales price. You also see that we continue to increase in numbers of transactions. I'm going to go back to the slide on DFW. You saw the same trend. We've increased in the numbers of transactions. And then in San Antonio, very healthy market, a very steady increase in average sales price and in the numbers of transactions. Okay, I'm going to skip over and now do a couple other things outside of just the economics. These are kind of some big trends trends that impact all of us, and impact your business, and impact buyers and sellers you're dealing with. And I probably had about 10 of them, and I cut it down to only 4, just to try to hit 4 that I think make the biggest impact. One is the GDP growth rate. You're kind of watching that as we go through the year. If you're seeing it do what it did in 2016 and drop down to growth rate, that is a pretty unhealthy growth rate. So far this year, we've had better growth rates. Last time I updated the slide, it was around 2%. I think it's actually above that now for year-to-date growth rate. Previous years has been running around 2.5% for the last 2 years. Before that, as much as 3% and 4%. So I think that that's something to really watch and be aware of, because that impacts all your buyers and how motivated they are and how much they feel like that I think their overall confidence level. Another big area that I think is just very worrisome is our national debt. We're actually over 20 trillion now. We're running at 104% of our GDP is our debt. That we reached that as of the first quarter 2017, and having as much as another federal aid to both Florida and Texas for these hurricanes isn't going to help that debt. Another area that I think affects y'all is the homeownership rate. We really increased the homeownership rate in this country leading up to the recession up to almost 70%. It had been historically around 64%. And we found out that that was not a good thing to take it up to 70%. That additional 6% that we increased it by were people that should not be able to buy a home and the ability to own a home. So we put people in a home using financing that we shouldn't have used, and many of them make the first payment. So we've dropped down to consistently been dropping down since the recession, and we've actually gone below our historic norm of 64%. All of that is literally taking people now back out of the market as home buyers that you would normally have had in the market. So that tends to be a bit of a drag on things, and I think we're all waiting to see for that homeownership rate to level off and not keep dropping. And I think we're there, but it's been a little worrisome watch it go through the 64% threshold and on down to 63 and below 63. And we've all been hoping that there's not something else, another shoe to fall about what the homeownership rate is going to be. You know, you hear things about that we're going to be a renter society. We're not going to be a homeowner society. And that's not true. Again, we're basically at 63% homeownership rate, and our historical average was 64%. So I think all that's happening is a correction back to what our country makes the most sense for our country. An area that is definitely impacted you and your buyers and your millennial buyers is the student debt. 10 years ago, a decade ago, we were at around 500 billion in debt, which is an obscene number to begin with, to have people coming out of college having that kind of debt. Well, we've added $1 trillion to that since that over the last decade. So now we're at 1.4 trillion of total student debt. Average per student debt is around 37,000. NAR estimates show that delays their decision to buy a home by about 3 years. They already are delaying anyway because they're waiting longer to have kids and get married. Compounding effect of the whole millennial generation having to deal with the debt and having delayed decisions that would have been to buying a home. But to some degree, you can also count that as a pent-up demand. That whole big bubble of millennials, 80 million, 85 or even 90 million in millennials, they are finally reaching those decisions, those inflection points, and making those decisions. And I think there's a whole lot more home sales to be had in the next 3 to 5 years at a higher rate than what we've been experiencing, just because of these two demographic trends. I'm going to cut to the last two things and try to keep us on track here. I've got 5 more minutes, so I'm going to go fast. I think one of the big significant trends in the real estate industry is just how much money is being invested. So See, last year we had 2.6 billion invested in real estate technology. I think this year it's going to be around 3 billion, 5 billion intelligence technology, all kinds of alternative virtual environments such as EXP. You're going to have sellers wanting to not just have a virtual tour, but a virtual reality tour, and they're going to expect you to put that all together and for all their friends with their Oculus. All the Facebook advertising is just staggering how many changes are happening almost every day for that. I think all of that is very different than in the past. We just are seeing so much more invested than what we've seen in the past that I think it's a really important for all of us to stay aware of it, stay on top of it. We all really are technology companies now. My world is seeing e-notarization come into play by next July. So with that, every single piece is in place for us to do a complete e-closing environment when you come to my office, or I can come to you and do an e-closing environment. And that's going to be a pretty significant change, even in my business. But I think what I think impacts you is that you have to understand all this, because when buyers and sellers come to you, they may not expect you to implement all that technology, but they do expect you to know about everything, and they're participating in it so much. Just kind of as an example of driving this point home, here's what's happened to the retail industry. They are now closing more units than they've ever closed, just because of this trend where the internet retail has far surpassed the department stores retail. That now consumers are in a position where they're willing to provide any kind of intimate and personal details on Facebook and Amazon or over texting. They're truly ignoring all kinds of security concerns because they want to do business online. They're even willing to trust online systems and processes to big multinational corporations, putting a microphone in their living room and letting them listen into everything that is said in the house. I think that's just a big tipping point for how more and more consumers are expecting more technology in every single thing that they do. Interestingly, though, and I wanted to put in this slide because I thought this really sends a big message. Even though there's more self-help solutions now for buyers and sellers than there's ever been, there's also a bigger demand for the realtor in their consulting role, like they've back in 2001, it was 69%. It's now up to 89. Even in Texas and the Southwest, it's 90% demand to have a realtor, and FSBOs are at an all-time low. And I just think that's a very documented point, and I think it's something for everyone to really keep in mind, that what buyers and sellers, I believe, are at a point of is they have learned so much and they've seen so much data, and all of it's conflicting and all of it's confusing. And they actually now appreciate the role that you do more than they ever have. They want someone who's an expert to explain all this conflicting data and this overwhelming amount of information that they've tapped into. They are more educated and they're also more confused. So your role is, I think, to understand that and really play into that. Here's my last point. I think your biggest threat is to get caught up in some of the different kinds of wire fraud and cybercrime that's out there. It's really picking up dramatically. I don't have time right now to go into some of the examples I've seen in just the last 2 weeks, but it used to be one fake email that was trying to trick you. Now I'm getting 3 and 4 fake emails from different sources, all of them timed and coordinated to create a lot of confidence that this really is real, and that I really need to, or the buyer needs to, or the seller needs to really listen to what they're saying about where to wire the money. And more of yours and my clients are getting tricked into doing so. So here's what the National Association of Realtors, in my last 2 slides, National Association of Realtors, Jessica Egerton, has said she's got 10 things for you to know about. I'm just going to go through the top 3 up here. Keeping your operating systems and utilities and applications all patched up to date. That's what's happening with all these ransomware and with all of the breaches with the credit union, the credit provider, the Equifax, that was because they didn't patch them. And they wound up allowing the criminals to get into their system because of that and have a full-blown data breach. If all of you are not warning your clients in writing and having them sign it that you will not be providing any wire information, it'll only come from the title company, you should be, because this is what your NAR is telling you, it's what TAR tells you. It's the best advice to do. You do not want to be involved in that, so that you're telling your agents, your customers, that if they do get anything from you, consider it false. Pick up the phone and call. Don't use that information as to where you're going to wire your information. If you're getting it from the title company and passing it on to the buyer and seller, I'd advise you to stop doing that. And in fact, go back and tell your clients, you'll never get that from me. And if you ever see anything from me about wiring of funds, just presume it's false and it's a criminal trying to trick you into something. We had that happen last week where the buyer had been told repeatedly to be aware of that, and sure enough, the criminals were trying to get them started calling them, even picking up the phone and having a conversation and pretending to be my closer and getting them to send money and trying to talk them into sending money. And both us and the realtor had told them, do not fall for that. You're gonna get that one time from us early on in the process when you know it's us. Check email settings. That's something that we've seen happen where we had one agent, a real estate agent, where they'd gone in and changed the settings in their Gmail to forward all the email to the bad guy. So he just sat there and followed along on all the email. He was seeing the entire transaction because it was getting forwarded into his account. The solution for that is to engage two-factor authentication on your email. Use strong passwords, change them fairly regularly. You do those three things, then you're not going to wind up with getting hacked as easily as so many agents have been hacked. I won't go through the things to do. They come from your association and they're in my presentation. So when it gets sent out to you, you can kind of slowly go through all that. If you have any questions on any of this, I'm more than happy to visit with you offline or a separate time, or take your questions now.
David, that is awesome. Everyone, is that just not incredible, valuable information? Oh my word. We do have time for a couple of questions. Joy McKinney, I think you were asking a couple of questions. I didn't get to in the text chat, but do y'all have any 2 or 3 quick questions we can ask? And David, there's lots of thank yous all through here. So helpful. Thank you. Wow. Great info. Great job. I think there's a couple of questions, but I lost them in the text chat about some of the job growth and things happening around the state.
Well, they can send the specific question. I can go pull the data up and give them something very specific, and I don't mind doing that at all. So,
and then David, what is your? Do you mind sharing your email address?
Oh, not at all.
They can ask. Okay, what is your email address? And I'll put it in the text chat.
Yeah, it's david.tandy at texasnationaltitle.com. It's a whole mouthful, but it's pretty easy to do.
Absolutely. Absolutely. And I suspect that we may have you back in the future, because I think this was fantastic.
Well, if I get some feedback from everyone, I'll probably know a little better about how to structure the presentation. I'm happy to customize it to what you all really, really want. And you're more than welcome to send me questions, and I'll be glad to provide answers. And I appreciate the chance today to present to you all.
David, thank you. More key. So, thank you. And one of our fancy things, David, that we do here, because of the lack of voice interaction a lot of times in meeting, is we love to dance. Oh, okay. So I don't know if your avatar has danced yet while you're on stage, but that's kind of a tradition here. If you hit an F7 key, and those in the audience hit your F7 key, we'll make a little bit of noise as well.
Oh, okay. Oh, wow. Okay.
We believe in having fun in our cloud environment.
All right. Well, that sounds pretty cool. I love all the dancing. Thank you all
David,
very much. I enjoyed it.
Thank you. We appreciate it tremendously. And this is not incredible, valuable information. Ron will share out this presentation as well. well, and we'll send that out again later on today. Video and everything worked. It'll be uploaded as well as on the Texas EXP YouTube channel. And the slides, I think at that point, will coordinate with what he was saying. So we don't have the delay on the screen that we were experiencing a little bit.